What does it mean to lead with soul? To embody leadership not as a position of power, but as a sacred calling that is rooted in purpose, connection, and transformation. In this episode of The Fertile Dark, we'll explore the essence of leadership through archetypes and cultural models, as well as the qualities of wholeness that take leadership from a traditional egocentric model to a soul-centric model. Leadership that enables us to be able to deal with, navigate, and overcome the challenges that we face in our daily lives in all spheres of our influence from a place of wholeness, purpose, groundedness, and centeredness. We'll unpack the idea that leadership is not just what we do, it's who we are when we live in alignment with our soul's purpose. So let's dive in. I spent a lot of time in the military, specifically in the Army, and one of the fundamental things that I was required to learn very early on was the Army's definition of leadership. From a very early age, I was put into a position of leadership. And one of the things you have to be able to learn is, how does the Army view that role of being a leader? They define it as the process of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. Now, when I look at my time in the military and I look at many other opportunities that I've had to lead since then, I find that it's really common to explore the idea of leadership through this egocentric worldview. And I want to look at that a little bit and push against it a little bit. I think it's helpful to look at maybe why do we find some of the leaders that we have? What are different ways that we lead? I want to say leadership, I think that leaves a pretty bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And so I want to look at that a little bit, right? What is it we're really talking about here? And how do we look at this through an archetypal soul-centric lens? To start, I'd like to look at 4 leadership roles that the National Outdoor Leadership School identifies and teaches about. My undergraduate education was in outdoor ed, and we did a lot of work with Knowles and their outdoor leadership principles and programs. And Knowles identifies 4 different leadership roles. There's the designated leader, the active follower, the peer leader, and the self-leader. Typically, I think when we talk about leadership, we're looking at this role of the designated leader, the one who was identified by someone else to step into this position of leading others to accomplish a certain task or objective. And so I want to look at that a little bit. If we were to look at leadership through the lens of spiral dynamics, which I know we've talked about previously on the show, leadership needs to align with a group's center of gravity developmentally. We typically, as a group, when we're choosing a leader, we're trying to find someone who's most aligned with that center of gravity. Because when they're unaligned, it creates a lot of friction between the group and the person who is, quote unquote, in charge. From this perspective, the person who is designated as a leader can be a real catalyst for evolution and development. This is especially true if developmentally this person has progressed a little bit farther up the spiral than other members of the group. But ultimately, through this particular lens, the developmental level of the group is going to impact their expectation of that person in that designated leader position. So we might start to consider the people that we see who are chosen to be in these designated leader positions. What does that tell us about the center of gravity of the people who have chosen them? And what can we learn about what that would entail for the expectations that this leader may be embodying? The thing that I'm really curious about, though, is the difference between egocentric leadership, which is how we typically talk about it, and how I've talked about it almost my entire adult life, and instead to look at it from a soul-centric place. So you might consider it through the lens of, how might your leadership look if it flowed from your deepest, truest self? And I think what we find is that the way that we approach any of these roles begins to change. Now, Riane Eisler, she gives us a really interesting framework to look at this all through. In her book, The Chalice and the Blade, she develops what she calls cultural transformation theory. In that theory, she identifies two different models of society. One of those is what we might consider the status quo, and that is what she refers to as the dominator model. It's the model of society that people will refer to as the quote-unquote patriarchy. It's where one half of humanity is ranked above the other half. She connects it to the image of the blade. This societal model emphasizes the power to take rather than to give life as the ultimate power to establish and enforce domination. So you might just think, how does a person who is quote unquote in charge stay in charge? Do they do it through violence or the threat of violence or in some other version of the use of force? How might a person respond to me if I were to come to them and stand in a place of advocacy that challenges this individual's mindset and approach to the organization or community? Would they be open to hearing what I have to say, or would they use some kind of consequence-oriented response or the threat of it to get me to step in line? That's what we would consider to be the dominator model. Eisler's other approach is what she calls the partnership model. This is associated with the image of the chalice or the grail, which is a very powerful image to use, which maybe we'll do another episode on the grail myth because it is so significant. But in this model of society, social relations are based primarily on linking rather than ranking. So think more like a circle and less like a ladder. There is an emphasis on life-generating and nurturing powers rather than on establishing domination or dominance. And it's interesting as you read this book from Eisler, she really digs into the importance of these two different models and these two different symbols. They play a lot into how we see the nature of this word leadership. I really love what she says. She says that given our present high level of technological development, a dominator model of social organization is maladaptive. And she does this really beautiful comparison of Freud's versus Maslow's view of the psyche. Because dominator model of society is really based on acquiring and providing safety and security as the primary objective. So she looks at Freud's model of the psyche, which is emphasizing food, sex, and safety, and she compares it to Maslow's model of growth and actualization, where their actualization is a need that human beings experience. And this requires a real different mindset shift. We've got to look at community and organization and relational experiences from a place of saying, what's my focus? Am I focused on scarcity and security? Or am I focused on getting to actualization? Now, obviously, you can't move to actualization until your subsistence level needs are met. You have to do one before the other. That is a requirement. The challenge becomes, where does my focus stop? And what that is going to mean is that when we come together, we are now going to be in a place of having to see each other and ourselves differently. If we want to stand in this archetypal space of the grail, shoulder to shoulder, we can't abdicate responsibility for what happens within an organization or within a community to someone else who has been designated as the leader. And that's really where we come into this role of active follower. It's easy to sit in the space of being a passive member, of sitting back, watching something happen, and just allowing it to persist. And I understand that there are a lot of nuances to that experience, especially in a dominator model-based society where we as members of a community or group may be made to feel that our voice is unwelcome, unwanted. We may feel that we have been stripped of power. and that we have no capacity to advocate for anything. But something that can be helpful is to look at this experience through the lens of conflict, which may seem counterintuitive, but just go with me on this. So Rand Eisler references a psychiatrist named Jean Baker Miller, who talks about the role that conflict plays within a community, especially when we're moving from a dominator model to a partnership model. And she says that we want to make conflict productive rather than destructive. And this entails re-examining our own goals and actions as well as those of the other person or party, which can help us move into a place of productive change rather than non-productive rigidity. And Miller shares that our current view of conflict is frightening. We all, I think, sometimes feel very conflict avoidant. It can be scary, but it also is not conflict. It's almost a reverse. It is the end result of the attempt to avoid and suppress conflict. Or in other words, the conflict that's occurring is as my worldview and my self-view come into contact with someone else's. And we step into this place of rumbling together in a space of vulnerability, which is something that Brene Brown talks about. We're going to rumble together in that vulnerable space so that we come to a place of mutually beneficial partnership. And that's really hard to do in our current model, but it is something that we want to understand and work towards. The challenge comes in the way that we often show up in these environments and in these interactions. So if we were to come back and we were to revisit these 4 leadership roles, we can start to see them a little bit differently. The designated leader may exist. They're the person who has the talking stick. They're the person who is leading the circle. They're the one that is holding the vision for the experience. They don't have to be the most experienced. They don't have to have the most prestigious position. It's the individual who's chosen to be the voice for the group. The other members of the group then actively follow in the way that they are supporting the vision, which could mean pushing back, or also maybe they're not pushing back. Maybe instead they're helping to support. We then move into a peer leadership model, which is what happens when there is a person to either side of us or across from us who needs something. We may not be the voice of the group. We may not be the one holding the talking stick. We may not be the one that is leading the drum circle. We may not be the one that is leading the yoga class, that's leading the meditation, whatever the circumstance is. But I can work with that individual in a peer-to-peer, shoulder-to-shoulder, mutually beneficial way. But ultimately, all of these different leadership roles come back to the foundational element of being self-led, of showing up from a place of capital S self-leadership without being able to be led by self. We aren't able to do these other things. Now, when I say led by self or self-leadership, this is an idea that Richard Schwartz brings in that is really potent. He says, when you experience self, you naturally feel more connected to humanity in general, and also to something larger and more encompassing, the earth, the universe, the big, all caps self, or whatever your experience of this is. In other words, once you are in self, you feel less isolated and lonely. As you repeatedly prove to your parts that they don't have to blend, you gradually experience more of the 8 C's, and more often as well. And you'll also discover other qualities rising up in you, things like joy, equanimity, forgiveness, perspective, and playfulness. And I know we've talked about the 8 C's before, but just for the sake of having them all in one place, when we talk about the 8 C's, we're talking about curiosity, calm, confidence, compassion, creativity, clarity, courage, and connectedness. When we are in a place where these 8 C's are present, it allows us to be shoulder to shoulder with other people in a way that fosters soul-centric community. We are not instead blended with these protective parts of our psyche, things like anger, fear, resentment, criticism, which prevent us from being able to be with another person in a way that is needed to help a community or an organization or a group, a relationship, to be able to move forward in development and expression of our deepest, truest selves. Now, something that can be helpful for us is to look at all of this through an archetypal lens, which there are a lot of ways you could do that. I've chosen a few. And the idea behind this is that it allows us to see what might this look like? What are some capacities that I can work to develop within myself so that as I find myself in different situations, that I can be self-led in a powerful place that flows from my deepest, truest self. So there are 3 different archetypes that I want to look at. The first is the king, the second is the queen, and the third is the elder. And these aren't in any particular order of preference. It's honestly just based on which book did I grab first to look at. I really appreciate the exploration of the king archetype that Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette present in their book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. The book itself is a beautiful exploration of archetypal wholeness, and anyone would benefit from being able to read it for their own development as they seek to move towards wholeness, as well as be able to understand other people in another person's journey towards wholeness. And here are some things that they use to describe the king. Now, as we do this, keep in mind, any of these archetypal capacities and energies can be present in any of our different leadership roles. So just keep that in mind. And hopefully, as we do this, we'll be able to really feel connected to the essence of these things and have some ideas for how we can move forward with the different environments we find ourselves in. So the king acts in service of fellow human beings, the realm and the cosmos. And by realm, it's whatever the dimension is. The realm could be an after-school club. It could be a game night. It could be my home. It could be my neighborhood community. It could be a school community. Any of those things in this instance represent the realm. The energy of the king is generative. In the past, kings were ritually killed when their ability to live out the archetype failed. So rather than tying the energy of the king to the fate of a mortal human who aged and became increasingly impotent, that energy was re-embodied and renewed in the lives of the people and the whole world as the king was ritually killed and then a new king was chosen. Some of the functions of the king are organizing, ordering, and creatively healing. And for that last one, the creative healing, this is one of my favorite facets of the king. And I especially love the way it is portrayed in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy, specifically when Aragorn, as the king, goes into the houses of healing. It's a great example. Now, when we look at the king through the lens of an immature or weak or insufficient presence of that archetypal energy, the quote-unquote realm, right, our dimension that we are in, is often given to disorder and chaos. So the king presents this place that is generative and also organized and ordered and helps to promote healing. The king's culminating generative ordering act has been to marry the land. There's a connection to the natural world that the king holds. And it's interesting that the good king delights in noticing and promoting good individuals to positions of responsibility. He holds audience not to be seen, but to see, admire, and delight in the other people within the dimension that he exists within, in order to reward them and bestow honors upon them. It's in that way that when you sit with another person, that you feel seen, valued, understood, that they really appreciate and enjoy you for your uniqueness in the world. They're not there with you for you to Show how much you appreciate them. They aren't there to get something out of you, but to give you something from them that is necessary for you to be living from this place of wholeness. Moore and Gillette say that in its archetypal fullness, the king possesses the qualities of order, of reasonable and rational patterning, of integration and integrity. It stabilizes chaotic emotion and out of control behaviors. It gives stability and centeredness. It brings calm. In its fertilizing and centeredness, it mediates vitality, life force, and joy. It brings maintenance and balance. It defends our own sense of inner order, our own integrity of being and of purpose, our own central calmness about who we are, and our essential unassailability and certainty in our identity. It looks upon the world with a firm but kindly eye. It sees others in all their weakness and in all their talent and worth. It honors them and promotes them. It guides them and nurtures them toward their own fullness of being. It is not envious because it is secure in its own worth. It rewards and encourages creativity in us and in others. So a good way to look at the king. If I am in a situation where I am a member of a community, how do I feel in relation to another person, especially if that person is in a designated leader role? As a general rule, a designated leader in Western society will be in a position of power and hierarchical authority. Do I feel compassion, empathy, connection? Do I feel heard, seen, understood, valued? Do I feel like I as a human being matter? Do my thoughts and feelings matter? If not, we can start to have some red flags come up and we can say, there's something off here. Now, I can also use that as a mirror into myself and say, okay, these are the specific things that are bothering me. Do I also possess any of these shadowy qualities that I can then begin to heal and integrate in my own journey towards wholeness? Now, I want to look at the queen. The queen is the complement to the king. And we've talked before about masculinity and femininity from this archetypal place. Both of these archetypal energies are present within each person. We may also find that in our journey towards in our developmental journey, as we move towards wholeness, as we move towards a deeper, more meaningful life, that we resonate with one or the other more. Now, I really love Mara Branscom's book, Sage Huntress Lover Queen, to look at this archetype. She has this way of writing that really pulls you in and conveys this energy and excitement in developing these archetypal energies. She has a whole chapter on the queen. It is beautiful. And here are some things that I think can be really helpful to see and think about and consider when we look at the queen. She is a deeply initiated, powerful visionary who weaves her knowledge across the world to be in service to her soul's calling. She's a wise woman who crafts, strategizes, and organizes her passions and shares them unapologetically with the world. The queen makes courageous decisions for the betterment of humanity. She embodies wholeness. She is a clear channel of refined inner strength. The queen has come to peace with the unknown and does not waste her vitality on excessive worrying. She has learned to let go, digest the lessons learned, and move on effectively and efficiently to be in service of her vision. Crafting a personal sanctuary is part of her sacred constellation. Honoring divine timing through clearing her thought channels and trusting her gut instincts is part of her matrix. She doesn't wait for everything to be perfectly lined up before she acts. She utilizes the resources available to her in the moment and strikes while the iron is hot. The queen embodies an unforgettable presence that exudes a devoted passion to her chosen cause. She tends to her spirit through practices such as mediation, counseling, nature immersion, and alternative healing rituals. She knows she must stay attentive to body, mind, and heart. She uses language, articulation, and clarity to bring her visions alive. The queen gathers her support team and loves to collaborate. She encourages us to take the seat of soul, to devote this precious life to evolving consciousness through lifelong learning, service, and leadership. And I just love this. I feel like we could just read this entire chapter. It's so beautiful. It's so compelling. Ultimately, in a similar way to the king, the queen has a powerful, potent generativity. One of the ways I like to think about the relationship between these two, and that often comes up when we look at masculine, feminine archetypes, is solar versus lunar. Both of them are critical to the development of the individual and the community. The queen brings this body, mind, heart connection and then creates the container within which a person can go inside themselves, find their soul-rooted seat, their soul-rooted purpose, and embody that in the world. And she does it through connection with the natural world. And there's more to the nuance there. In both the king and the queen, we see the embodiment of a leader, of someone who was able to stand in a community of whatever size or makeup and to be firmly rooted in their soul's purpose in a way that enables those around them to have the necessary capacity to do the same. They see others in a way and interact with them in a way where the other person feels not as other, but as seen and appreciated and valued for their nuanced uniqueness, which includes their gifts and their weaknesses. The king and queen both serve as a resource for development of the individual into a constellated member of a larger group, not just with other people, but with the more than human world. The last archetype I want to look at is that of the elder. And there are so many different ways we could do this, as I've said. My thought and feeling here, it was to choose archetypes associated with the idea of the designated leader that are so desperately needed in the world in which we live, because they're so tangibly absent. And the elder is one of those. I've had the blessing to work with true initiated elders, and the experience of working with them is singular. It's difficult to describe what that experience is like, but it is very different than someone who is considered a quote unquote elder simply by their chronological age. This is very much a developmental stage on a journey. One of my favorite resources for looking at elderhood is Bill Plotkin. I was reading in his book, Nature and the Human Soul, to understand more about what does it mean to be an elder. And as he writes it, he identifies several roles that the elder fulfills, and then several capacities that the elder enacts within a community. So what I thought I would do is start with capacities and then read some of what Bill Plotkin has written about these roles that the elder holds. So there's 5 capacities that are associated with elders: defending and nurturing the innocence and wonder of children, mentoring and initiating adolescents, mentoring adults in their soul work, guiding the evolution or transformation of the culture, and maintaining the balance between human culture and the greater earth community. I feel like these are really easy ones to look at. You know, I think about people that I know who, according to Western society, are chronologically considered elders, and based on this list of capacity, might be more accurately referred to as olders. For example, several people I'm thinking of cannot stand the innocence and wonder of children. Children are meant to sit still, be quiet, and be seen and not heard. That's it. It is the opposite of defending and nurturing the innocence and wonder of children. You can also see it in the way that people interact with adolescents. I've worked with adolescents for a long time, and it's really interesting to see some of my own struggles in working with adolescents, but also in some of the ways that I see other adults also interacting with adolescents. There isn't mentoring. There isn't a focus on initiating. There is a forceful exertion on adolescents to toe the line, to do what they're told, to do things the right way. Now, a lot of times we look at adolescents and we say, well, what about all of the choices that they make that maybe aren't the smartest choices in the world? That's where mentoring comes in. It's not about telling a teenager how terrible of a person they are, but it's about helping them really be initiated into their truest self and helping them be able to make the choices that are going to guide them on that journey. Another example that I've seen is the rejection of the idea of soul work. Yeah, and we could just keep going on and on and on about this. But ultimately, if we want to talk about leadership from the perspective of becoming an elder, of looking at community and saying, who are the elders? Who are the ones who hold the sacred knowledge of the community and that maintain connection to soul and earth and nurture the development of the community in navigating complex challenges that are beyond the developmental capacity even of other adults? We want to start looking here. We also can look at some of the things that Bill Plotkin points out here in some of the roles that elders fulfill. And I really just want to read this because it's so good. He says, the gift that the master, which is the archetype that he associates with elders, the gift that the master is to her people goes beyond her leadership, mentoring, and tending to the community soul. Her very being is a gift of wholeness, and in at least three ways. First, the core value in her life, which arises from her psycho-spiritual center of gravity, is the desire that everything and every creature be allowed its true place, so that the world functions in its fullness in accordance with its comprehensive destiny. She appreciates that each species, each habitat, and each social issue is related to all others. She understands that everything is alive, that it all fits together, and that we are all participants and reflections of the whole. Like a grove of old-growth trees, her vital presence holds the world together. She radiates wholeness. Second, through her soul-rooted individuation in the cocoon, wellspring, and orchard, the master has consciously cultivated her own wholeness. She has, in other words, accessed, strengthened, and integrated the four dimensions of the self: the innocent sage, the wild self, the anima or animus muse, and the generative adult. Her crowning confirms her wholeness in this sense. In addition to her mastery of her soul work, although she is neither perfect nor normative, her personality has become more particular, not more universal. She is as close as humans get to being fully human, to embodying and bestowing all the possibilities of humanness. Even when others can't name it, they can sense this wholeness in her presence. Third, through her specific actions, through her devoted tending of the web of life, and by her advocacy of the rights of all beings, the master lends to the human village an air of completeness, rightness, tolerance, compassion, and forgiveness, all these being close cousins of wholeness. So that'd be something that I might look at and start to consider and say, where am I at on my personal journey? For example, something that was really difficult for me for a long time was to look at the way that my hopes and desires for positive relationships with other adults in my life ultimately never materialized as a teenager and as a young child. And for a long time, what I felt was tremendous resentment and bitterness and criticism for all of those adults who turned a blind eye, told me I would never amount to anything, etc. However, as I moved forward through my own process of healing, I began to see these people that had been adults in my childhood from a place of compassion and tolerance and forgiveness. Did I think that what they did was right? No. Did I see them as coming by it honestly? Yeah. And that was hard at first and also helpful to be able to look at the way that somebody else was behaving and to see them from a place of curiosity and compassion, to be able to extend to them at least a portion of forgiveness in acknowledging that not everything about our interaction was intentional. So those are three different archetypes: the king, the queen, and the elder. The elder can be considered a developmental stage as well as an archetype. Ultimately, we want to be thinking about, how can I be in a place where, regardless of who I am interfacing with, whether it's myself, whether it's shoulder to shoulder with a peer in my community, whether it's someone who is in a position of being the designated individual to lead a group, maybe I'm the one who's been designated to lead a group, how can I interface with that leadership role from these archetypal capacities? We can also consider the people that we choose to put into these positions of trust. I can look at these people and, from a place of compassion, forgiveness, and tolerance, be able to look at the needs of my community, of my group, and say, I see you and I appreciate your gifts. I appreciate the struggle of your journey. And right now, you are not the person to be in this sacred trust. I am also here to advocate for you and your own personal development, as well as advocate for the sacredness of the trust that is in being the voice of the group. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into being able to stand in that place from this place of self-leadership. It's really easy to have these kind of conversations from a place of being blended with our protectors. It's easy to advocate from anger or from fear. It's easy to be reactive. It's very difficult to be able to advocate from a place of capital S, self, in part because it's so difficult to interact with others from that place when we feel so fundamentally different in our views, in our core beliefs, or when they are in some way negatively impacting us or those that we care about most deeply. It sends us into this space of fight or flight, or even to shut down. And that is really difficult. And it's especially difficult if it's an individual who's in a position that I feel like they have tremendous power, especially tremendous power to impact my quality of life. And I don't feel like I have reciprocal power to advocate for my needs or the needs of those that I love most dearly. And that's something that we can maybe explore later on. The challenge right now is to work on that self-leadership, to stand in a place of personal sovereignty. That's the goal for right now. So to do that, here's an invitation from Marissa Goody from her book, The Sovereignty Knot, that is a beautiful invitation to consider. She says, "My wish for you, for me, for all people is this: become so sure and grounded in your individual story that you cannot help but want to share your insights, compassion, and power with the collective. Become so strong in who you are that you feel prepared to reach out, to hold and help with one arm, and hold back the tide of distraction, disaffection, and cruelty with the other. Become sovereign in your own life, in your own spirit, in your own creativity, so you can stand for everyone else's right to be sovereign in theirs." And that's a powerful invitation. That is the place where the work begins, is to say, what are the things that hold me back from that place? And how can I begin the work of healing and holding around them? Because if I want to stand in a place of self-leadership and a place of personal sovereignty, I have to be able to work with those protective parts of myself and those exiled, wounded parts of myself that prevent me from being able to lead from that capital S self, whether it is with myself or in another setting. So just in closing, this idea of leadership can be seen as a sacred archetype that flows from our alignment with purpose, community, and our interconnectedness with each other and the more than human world. True leadership integrates the archetypes of the king, queen, and elder, as well as others, in a way that offers stability, vision, and wholeness. Self-leadership is the beginning of all of this, and we can identify its presence with the 8 C's that when we find these, it empowers us in our quest to embody these archetypal powers. So something for you to think about is what archetype or quality of leadership resonates with you the most right now, and how might you embody it in your own life today. I hope that you have found some meaning in this exploration of leadership today. I personally learned a lot in my own study and development as I prepared to share some of these things with you, but also it's been a long journey for me over the years. And I really want to hear about your own journey. What are you learning? What are the things that we need to explore more moving forward? And how can we work together as a community to align ourselves in a soul-centric way? I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences on Instagram or Facebook. You can find us in both places. You can also email me at podcast@fertiledark.com, all of which will be in the show notes. And next week, stay tuned for a discussion that we had with a wonderful person who uses acceptance and commitment therapy to help people elevate the quality of their life, overcome difficult thinking patterns and behavior patterns, and so much more. So until next week, keep diving deep and embracing the journey.